Welcome to Debating Metal. As always, I'm Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, and my co-host is Chris Kaye. Today, we're getting back to something we restarted doing at the beginning of the year. We're doing a worst to first episode, and we're going all the way back to the beginning where it all began. That's right. We're ranking the discography of Black Sabbath from worst to first.
Metal pioneers Black Sabbath have an astonishing 19 albums, 9 with original vocalist Ozzy Osbourne, 3 with Ronnie James Dio, 5 with Tony Martin, and 1 each with Ian Gillan and Glenn Hughes respectively. On this episode, Kenneth and I are going to rank their albums from what we think is their weakest all the way up to what we believe is their very best.
So sit back, relax, turn it up to 11, and let the debate begin. Chris, we've finally gotten around to doing Black Sabbath worst to first. This has been something we've talked about on and off for a while. And it's because it's such a, how can I say it nicely? Eclectic. Well, it's a daunting task, but it's such an eclectic catalog. And not because they change styles or anything like that, but because they change singers so many times.
Well, I mean, they did change styles, though. Like, they really shifted into different decades, and you could tell. They changed singers. They at one point, it wasn't even supposed to be Black Sabbath. It was supposed to be a Tony Iommi solo project. Turmoil in the band, basically firing the entire band and replacing them with, the Mob Rules lineup, and then firing that lineup and bringing back the previous one. There's all kinds of turmoil. They have a really interesting history, and they are consistently still, one of my top 10 bands of all time, so I definitely wanted to do this list.
So, you sit there and say top 10 bands of all time, and that's kind of like, it's a weird feeling for me. Okay. I remember, I think I mentioned it last week or on the last episode. We were talking about, I can't remember exactly what we were talking about, but I remember saying that I listened to, because we were talking about the albums that are, like career changers. So we were talking about Paranoid. And I remember going to a park with some friends of mine, and we would just listen to the cassette back and forth, flip it over, back and forth, And I remember that specifically with Paranoid, right? And so, through the years, I listened to the original Sabbath album. I never got into the middle albums. I ended up picking up Highway to Hell, Heaven and Hell. I ended up picking up Heaven and Hell and listening to that, and like really, really enjoyed that, and kind of seeing, knew the story that Ozzy, quit / fired. He has a solo career. Ronnie James Dio joined, and I'm like, this is a really good album. So then I never got into that middle period that was very questionable. The technical ecstasy, the Never Say Die. Even before that, like the Sabotage or Sabbath. I saw the records. I never got into them. I mean, I heard songs here and there. So doing this research for this episode was kind of eye-opening for me. And it is crazy to think about. To some point, with technical ecstasy and with Never Say Die, I feel like Black Sabbath regressed. And I think that's what happens when you give a band so much power, because they had power. They basically produced the albums themselves with an engineer. When you give someone that much power over their own musical portion of their career without having like outside input, you can go astray really quick, real easy. And I think that's what happened to them in that middle 70s, besides the drugs and all that shit that ended up controlling their life. But yeah, I personally think they regress. And there was so many things that I'm like, is this from 1965 or is this from 1979? I was like, this is so odd sounding to me. So
I definitely see some merit in what you're saying. I guess we can get into more detail on it when we get to those particular albums. But yeah, there's a period of time where they were a strong collaborative effort, and then there was a time where they weren't. And we're going to see the results of that when we discuss each album.
All right. Well, let's get into it. We'll discuss every album that we have listened to painstakingly for the last 2 weeks, and then we are ranking them from worst to first. Do you want to do this first, or do you want me to go first?
I don't mind starting first this time. So
Okay.
let's start with their worst album, number 19, Forbidden.
So for you, 19 was Forbidden. Okay.
For me, all right. So I think for a lot of people, Forbidden is their worst album. I think there's certainly an argument for others, but for me, I remember when Forbidden came out. There was nothing about it that I really liked. It starts off with a track that has Ice-T on it, and like the idea of rap rock, rap metal. Some of that stuff was okay, but it felt like Black Sabbath was, doing something that was well outside of the bounds of what they should do. There's nothing wrong with experimentation. There's nothing wrong with trying new things musically, but this felt like a reach and not a good one. There's really no tracks on it other than maybe the title track Forbidden that I really have any... saying I like it is a bit much even. It's like Forbidden has a few moments on it that I think sound pretty good. Kiss of Death is not terrible, but that's about it. There's nothing on there that I really go, man, I want to ever listen to this. One more note.
Yes.
And I forgot to say that. The production is terrible.
Well, it was produced by Ernie C. So if those of you who don't know who Ernie C is, that's Ice-T's guitar player, I think. And so he was in the band Body Count, or he is. I don't know if he still is or not. But at the time, he was in Body Count with Ice-T, and he was the one who produced this album. Yeah, I agree with you. So for me, number 19 is Forbidden as well. This is one of those cases where a band is kind of, I don't want to say forced, but they're convinced that this is the right direction. And this is Black Sabbath we're talking about. Like Rick Rubin, when he did 13, and we'll talk about 13 a little bit later, but when Rick Rubin did 13, he worked with Black Sabbath and he tried to get them to be the Black Sabbath from 1970. And some of it was okay, and some of it the band didn't like. But so that's the thing, the producer is trying to do something. Ernie C was trying to do something. He's trying to get them to be more relevant, if you want to say. And I don't think that was something that they needed. They needed to get back to basics and being a hard rock, blues, heavy metal band, whatever you want to call what Black Sabbath was, will be. It's just one of those things that I definitely didn't work. I mean, to me, I see no redeeming value to anything on this album.
I agree. And it's a weird time because it's mid-90s. And there's a lot of different stuff going on at the time. Black Sabbath almost does not have a home in the mid-90s. There's nothing that makes sense for this album. So trying to find some form of relevance, I guess, is about all they could do. But it was a step way in the wrong direction.
Absolutely in the wrong direction. I mean, if they couldn't have stepped any farther away from where they used to be with this album, I don't know if there is anything else that they could have done.
Yeah.
So, and when you said they were without a home, you were kind of referring to like a label, or just in general, like they were just lost souls.
Yeah, just lost
walking the planet. But at the same time,
oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say at the same time, when you made that reference, the first thing I thought about was, a label home. And they had been dropped by Warner Brothers. They had been dropped by, I forgot who uh, who else they were with at one point, but IRS Records released this. They gave them the opportunity, and I'm like, oof, it's no bueno.
No, it
Actually, they had been with IRS for most of the 90s, or all of the 90s, really. All of the records, all of the 90s. They were on IRS Records.
It just amazes me that the production could drop off so heavily because, a few years before with Cross Purposes, Dehumanizer, even the Headless Cross, like the production was so much better, and this just sounds kind of tinny, like underproduced. It almost sounds like the drop off between like Kiss's first album and their second album.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not much to say about Forbidden that's positive, and then so it's probably better to move on.
Let's move on to number 18. All right, for me, number 18 is Cross Purposes. So this is the album that came out before Forbidden, and this is basically another album of, it's a Tony Martin vocal album, and to me, it doesn't really do anything. I mean, it's there are a couple of songs that are decent on this album, but for the most part, it's a lot of just not very heavy stuff. And I'm not trying to say like light stuff, it's just it's not Black Sabbath, and that's the reason why I kind of like was turned off by it.
See, that argument I don't necessarily agree with, because saying it's not Black Sabbath, because you have to think about where Black Sabbath was at all this time. And I guess it was maybe easier if you were following them, to understand how they got this far away from where they started. Because, I mean, it's really Tony Iommi, right? He's the only one that was consistently with the band for its entire existence. Black Sabbath is essentially his band. So you could say like, oh, well, Ozzy, the Ozzy version is the only one that matters. You could say the Dio version is the only one that matters, if you're any fan out there. But the fact is, they have very distinct incarnations with different singers, but there is an evolution that followed through. And when you put them in order, you have they start off as a jam band, they become extremely heavy, they evolve, like you said, back into kind of being a jam band. Then Dio steps in, brings his elements in, and it becomes heavier. But even then, their second album becomes a little bit softer. They go with Ian Gillan, and Ian Gillan brings in very deep Purple-esque aspects to it. Then it becomes a solo band, essentially, that they are forced to carry the Black Sabbath name. And then, bring in Tony Martin, and you feel that evolution, because even then, the album was written for Ray Gillan and not for Tony Martin initially. And then they fired him and brought in Tony Martin to sing his parts. So you get more of a styled album that was written for Ray Gillan. So there's so many things. Like to say this isn't Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath has never been consistent. So, to say like at any given time, like even with their specific singers that have multiple albums, there's no consistency. It's the closest you would get would be the Ozzy era.
I mean, I get what you're saying in that regards, because there's so many different things going on, and we're going to mention a lot more about their changes when we get to those specific albums where those changes were made. But I just think what happens is, yes, this is, you can classify this as, heavy metal, as you can classify this as hard blues rock, or whatever you want to call that. Mm-hmm. And this particular album, Cross Purposes, this is actually had Geezer Butler playing bass on it. So you got half of the original Black Sabbath on this, and you've got Jeff Nichols, which
he'd been with the band for a long time.
Right. He'd been with the band, and Bobby Rondinelli is a drummer who has been around for a while and everybody kind of knows who he is. And then Tony Martin, obviously everybody knows, or Tony was comfortable with Tony Martin as a singer and brought him back because this is an album that came out after Dehumanizer. And so they had reunited the Mob Rules era of Black Sabbath and did Dehumanizer, did a tour, and it went south again. And so now, they bring Tony Martin back. It's just, to me, it's an aimless album, if I put it that way. And it's one of those, it almost feels like it's all leftover filler shit. And to me, there's no direction and there's no real Black Sabbath to it. I didn't like it.
Okay. Well, I guess I will talk about Cross Purposes a bit later, because my number 18 is 13. I'm not a big fan of this album whatsoever. I picked it up day one when it came out. It drones on. It's trying to recapture the stuff they did in their earliest years, especially with the original Black Sabbath album, but instead it just comes off as tired, bored. The lyrics are uninspired. Ozzy has no enthusiasm behind his vocals whatsoever. Everything is doom and gloom. It's very homogenous all the way through. Like, you could listen to it, and it's sometimes hard to tell one song from another. It's really very close to forbidden as far as quality for me. It's just, production is much better. I like Ozzy's voice better than I like Tony Martin. I can find maybe 2 songs that I find any value in on this one. It's Live Forever and Dear Father. I'm not a big fan of God is Dead. I know people like that one, but I just think this is a really crappy album.
Now, my 13 for me is a little bit higher up on the rank. I agree with you in some of the aspects as far as it's not a very good album, but if you're going to tell me that, obviously you think Cross Purposes is better, or you think, other albums are better than this one. Mm-hmm. My personal point is I disagree with that, only because it's more along the lines of what they're trying to be. To me, it was almost like they're forced to do this album because they reunited, and they want to put out a tour. They want to do this, so they want to tour on something. They didn't have to, and
they should have not done the album.
Right. But, of course, they got convinced by Rick Rubin. Oh, we could do this and the other, whatever. Rick Rubin's had success reinvigorating certain bands. He's done it.
They couldn't even keep Bill Ward on board.
Well, that's strictly money. They didn't want to split it 4 ways, and I kind of agree with them. They were going to play him like a rented mule, essentially. Literally,
with him for not.
Yeah, I agree with Bill with not signing.
No, I agree with. I thought you were saying you agreed with Black Sabbath for not wanting to pay. No. I was like,
no. It should have been 4 equal ways. If they wanted
4 equal ways, they should have tried to work together. Like, money got involved, and it ruined the album.
Like, I want to know what kind of deal they're trying to give him. There's 3 of them. So what were they're giving 30, and then 10? Really? Or was Ozzy saying, I deserve 50 and the rest of you guys can split the other 50? I mean, I don't know. No one knows the truth about that. But it seems awfully odd that Geezer was in there. So to me, it was split 3 ways, and they were trying to give Bill just a hired hand, $50,000 a night or whatever. I don't know.
Bill is integral to their early sound, and not having him there, it was a problem to me too. Like, it's just not a good album.
So for me, there's a couple of songs that I do like. But again, I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. But the production was one thing that I felt was pretty decent on this. But we'll get more into it when we get to me talking about 13. All right. Okay. So, what is your number 17?
My number 17 is Seventh Star. I don't think it's a bad album per se. It's an oddity in their catalog for sure because it's not supposed to be a Black Sabbath album. I think on the album itself, Glenn Hughes sounds great. There's a few songs like "In for the Kill." I think is a really cool opener. There's some really a lot softer stuff later on. Even the bonus tracks I think are pretty good. There's some bluesy stuff. I do like the song "Danger Zone" to some degree, but it's if you're gonna say one of the albums is not a Black Sabbath album, it's this one, and there's a reason why. It's not. It's not supposed to be.
Right, and I get that.
But I kind of evaluated it by like what I think I enjoy the most as far as, the particular tracks. I basically I made a list and I said, these are the songs that really stand out to me. And then I said, these are the songs that I also enjoy when I listen to the album. And I kind of evaluated them that way. And then kind of rearrange things based on the actual merit of the song. Like, do I like this one over this one? Do I think this is a better song, etc.? So that's how I kind of found this list. Put it in order. And Seven Stars, just one I never go back to. Glenn Hughes is a great singer. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, just there's not a lot on here that I go out of my way to listen to.
Well, for me, I had this a little bit higher, so I'll talk about it when I get to that. Mm-hmm. Only because there's certain things about this album, there's certain songs that are better than other songs I listen to, and so that's why I kind of had it ranked a little bit higher, because there are some albums here in the middle that were just rough and tough to listen to. So I'll get to those, and they're obviously they're going to come up now. So for me, number 17 was Never Say Die. That's the last album for Ozzy before he was fired. And quite honestly, they should have just left it that way because it's just not good. It's uninspired. The production's terrible. The effort to me is terrible. There's this thing about like I mentioned at some point in one of our conversations, it went back to the 60s, and I'm like, why are we listening to something in 1979 that should have been released even before they released the first Black Sabbath album? Like, this stuff was even more 60s. It was flower power kind of songs in 1979. That era had died, or it came out in 78, but I mean, for the most part, it had its impact in 79, or lack of impact. So, so quite honestly, it was just bad, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that there are some notes that I have on that when I get to it.
Put it this way: to me, there's more redeeming value in Tony Martin's albums than this one.
That's fair. All right.
All right. So number 16 for me is The Eternal Idol. It's better than Never Say Die. I can say that. It actually had some decent songs on it, but it wasn't one of these where I'm going to say, oh, it's so decent it's going to rank, in the top 10. There's let's see, Eternal Idol. I had a note on this one. Oh, there's actually a couple songs that I was listening to, and I'm like, okay, I can deal with that song. The Shining, the first song in the album, not bad. Then they tried the whole doom metal thing, like the whole hitting those heavy chords and stuff like that. As much as Black Sabbath, quote unquote, created that, with the song Black Sabbath, in reality, if you think about it, they didn't do that a whole lot in the 70s. There's maybe one handful of songs that are close to that. And I think they kind of bought into their own hype later on, like in the Dio years, when they made songs like that with Dio. So to make songs like that on this album, they had done it before, but I really don't think that's them. It's weird. Black Sabbath is all over the place for me. This album just lands in that number 16 spot.
Okay, I have it a bit higher, but my number 16 is Technical Ecstasy. This is my least favorite Ozzy album. The only song of real merit is Backstreet Kids, which is actually a really good song. Then All Moving Parts is all right, but everything else is, it's a little heavier. It's a little bit better production than Never Say Die. Don't get me wrong, but there's nothing really good on it, so it's hard. Just being heavier doesn't have enough merit to carry it to the next level for me. And then my number 15 is Never Say Die. So it wasn't a whole lot higher than yours. But I've always really liked the song Never Say Die itself. I think that is a great song. Hard Road is not too bad. Shockwave also not too bad. Now this one's gonna be maybe a little controversial to the everyone that's ever heard, but Air Dance I actually really like. It is a very experimental, hippy dippy song, but there's something about it that I just really like, and it grew on me over time. And then I ironically like Johnny Blade because it's such a bad song.
What the hell's wrong with you?
It's okay. I hated it for the first 10 years I heard it, right? But then that Johnny Blade, like where he goes, Johnny Blade, it's so bad. It's like watching a train wreck of a movie and you're enjoying it because it's awful. That's the way I feel about that song. So I ironically like Johnny Blade. I don't think it's a good song. Don't get me wrong.
It's a terrible song.
Exactly, and it's funny. So
I get your point on it, and the fact that you put them both pretty close together, obviously tells you a lot about how you feel about the albums, but two, how the albums are themselves. I mean, I had it, I have Technical Ecstasy a little bit higher.
yeah.
Never Say Die just was to me was just so bad. It was just like,
The thing is, so you've only given these a week or so of listening to some of these albums.
Dude,
you may have heard them before, but I went through years of listening to even the worst albums. So these are, I didn't have to listen to anything to do this list because Black Sabbath is a band that I was really obsessed with them for a long time. Their history was just so interesting to me. Just having 78 members of a band,
well, they lost me after Born Again. I was really into Born Again.
Yeah.
But they literally lost me after that. And then I kind of got back into a little bit when Dio came back in the band, for Dehumanizer. But it's, I mean, I painstakingly listened to this album on the way home yesterday, and I just wanted to drive off the road at sometimes. It's like, okay, dude, Johnny Blade's terrible. Never Say Die is really good. Is a really good song. I love, and I actually like the version that Ozzy did on "Speak of the Devil." It's really killer version. He introduced it. This is the last song I ever wrote in Black Sabbath. I want to see that for real because I don't think you wrote anything on this song, but that's just me.
Not like his
not like Bark at the Moon.
Bark at the Moon.
his magnum opus of songwriting.
He wrote every single thing, every single note. What an incredible guy.
Dude, at 14 years old, I even knew that was bullshit. So I ranked Technical Ecstasy higher. There's actually some redeeming riffs on Technical Ecstasy. Never Say Die. I mean, Johnny Blade, I just want to fucking shoot my radio. Junior's Eyes, I was like, oh, apparently Zach did a really good version of it and showed it to Ozzy, and Ozzy liked it. And I'm like, whatever. It's just, yeah. And there was some hippie shit in the second half. I'm like, no, this is not my thing. And that's part of the reason why I was saying that Black Sabbath is so weird in that regard. Like, everyone holds them in such high reverence, right? And that's great. But guess what? To me, the reverence that they are held in is based on two periods of time. Okay, and it's from 1970, when everyone discovered them for the most part, up until 1975. So 5 years, and then the 2 years in Black Sabbath that had Dio, 1980 and 81.
I mean, it's not a whole lot different with other bands like Kiss. There are people that love their entire catalog, but there's some that are stuck in like the first 6 albums.
Oh no, don't get me wrong. Yeah, the totally. And then there's some people like Chris Jericho who love the 80s. They're
exactly.
that's fine. But
go to a YouTube comment section on a Tony Martin album. It's amazing how much people love that era of the band. Because to me, I always was like, this is the worst era. I'm not a big fan of his. And a lot of the stuff did grow on me as time went on. But like, I wasn't immediately drawn to that era. But there are some diehards that love that era of the band.
That's crazy. All right. Well,
to each their own.
Oh, of course. You know what? Let them be. More power to them. That's not me. My number 15 was the Headless Cross. I know you and I had talked about the Headless Cross, and you talked about how that's probably the best Tony Martin album. And quite honestly, I disagree. There's two that are. Oh, actually, no, just one that I think is better. Which is funny because you completely disagree with that assessment, but that's okay. We can agree to disagree and still like each other.
I don't like you anymore.
But Headless Cross just didn't do it for me. I mean, Headless Cross, I could have picked a song from here and there. I mean, the Headless Cross is an okay song, but it's slow and sludgy. Devil and the Daughter was interesting, but I just I
like that one.
I couldn't get into it per se, I don't know. It didn't do it for me as much as other songs or other albums did. So that was my number 15. So here's where the controversy begins. Number 14 for me. Actually, this whole thing's been controversial. Number 14 for me is Tear. Or some people know it as TYR because they don't really know what the word means. So Tear. I actually think that's better than Headless Cross. I actually like several songs from this. So there you go. I thought, I know people didn't like it. I know that there was a big, really, this sucks part to this album. But, I thought, the fact that it's got a lot of Norse mythology lyrics, I thought was pretty cool. I actually like several songs on here. So there you have it. I mean, Valhalla,
Tyr, if you don't know, is like you said, a Norse god. Basically, there's Norse mythology is very complicated. There's a group called the Aesir, and basically they're I want to say like representatives of warriors and heroes, and so Tyr is one of those gods. A god to the Vikings, etc. So one of Odin's sons, like Thor.
Well, anyway, that for me, I thought Tyr is better than Headless Cross in my opinion. And like I said, I like the song Valhalla. What was the other song that I thought was pretty good? I like Heaven in Black. And then there was some cool riffs on here that I said, oh, these could have been better, but they were still cool riffs. It's kind of like there's they could have done better with some of the songs. They didn't, and but
They could have done better, but they didn't.
They didn't, But to me, it was better than some of the other stuff that I was listening to. What's your number 14?
So this is our second crossover, which is mine is also Tear. I like this album. I don't really have a lot of problems with it. I think for the most part, it's pretty entertaining. Anno Mundi, the opening track, I think is really cool. Technically, there's an opener before that, right? Like a instrumental that leads into it.
It's built into the song.
Yeah. Then The Lawmakers, a really cool song, Heaven in Black. I think it's a really underrated album, and a big part of it is that availability was not there. This one was one of the hardest ones for me to find when I originally collected all of Black Sabbath's discography. I think I ended up having to buy it on eBay at one point. But it's one that I think deserves a second chance from a lot of people. It's not the best. Obviously, we're both ranking it at number 14. But there's some good stuff here.
Okay, yeah, I think so. I definitely think so. It's so non a Black Sabbath album that it's not even listed on Spotify's discography list.
Yeah, it's really hard to find, which is unfortunate. So,
but now I think about it, I'm going to check here because sometimes that happens, and they for some reason it gets on a different list and it doesn't.
Like they don't have it listed in the correct. Yeah, I've seen that many times. And
no, that's not the case. It's just not there.
It's so funny because I use YouTube Music, and there's so many things that are hidden within their catalog that you have to find. Like you wouldn't know they were there, even if you type in the name of it. It takes a little bit of searching. So I don't think that's the case with this one at all. It may be locked up due to whoever owns the album, but yeah. So moving on to my number 13, I've got Born Again. I do like this album, don't get me wrong. It's another kind of oddity in their catalog because they brought in Ian Gillan after some drunken negotiations, and neither party really was happy with it. They did a full tour. As soon as the tour was done, Ian peaced out. But they did make some great songs here. Trashed is awesome. Zero the Hero to me is an iconic track. I remember the first time I heard it was on a greatest hits collection. I think it was the best of Black Sabbath. And I was like, Ozzy sounds weird. Like, what what is this, But it wasn't Ozzy, obviously. But I was also like a 7-year-old kid. So I do like Hotline, Digital Bitch, but they're so like oddities in this catalog. It's hard for me to really put it above other stuff that I usually end up going back to listen to more than Born Again.
Yeah, I can see that point, but for me, Born Again is a little bit higher. So for me, number 13 is Seventh Star. And so here's what I have to say about Seventh Star. It's got some good songs on it. They're not the best songs in a Black Sabbath mode kind of album.
Mm-hmm.
So this was supposed to be Tony's solo album. And basically what he did was put together a Deep Purple / Rainbow / White Snake / every hard rock blues band that came out of England in the late 70s and 80s. And that's what this album is. This is so far not a Black Sabbath album, and that's because we know that Tony was supposed to put out a solo album, but they forced him to put it under the Black Sabbath name. But these songs are not bad if they're standalone something else other than Black Sabbath. But they're under the Black Sabbath moniker, so you kind of have to accept that.
Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, I've heard countless stories about bands that are forced to put out. I mean, I was just watching the documentary, episode from Metal School. It's a great YouTube channel if you haven't checked them out. But the Candlemass was forced to release, I think, like two times albums as Candlemass, even though it was originally supposed to be solo projects from their bass guitarist. So, we've seen this from bands time and time again where they're forced to use the moniker. But that doesn't take anything away from the album itself. Like it is still a really good album. I ended up picking up Tony Iommi's. I guess that he released it under Iommi, but that he did 2 albums, Fused with Glenn Hughes, and then he did a. I guess it was recording sessions that they ended up releasing called the DEP sessions. You can find both of those. They should be available. But if you do end up liking Seventh Star, I would also check those out as well.
Yeah, I actually have Iommi, that first one. I'm looking at
the DEP session.
No, the other one.
Fused.
Yeah,
Fused came actually after. So I think that was the last one they did together.
All right, so I'm going to look that up. But the thing about Seventh Star, what I don't like, and this is the thing that pisses me off about record labels, is a record label should have an understanding and listen to the music and say, well, this doesn't sound anything like Black Sabbath. This sounds like Whitesnake, or this sounds like Deep Purple, or this sounds like Rainbow, because that's exactly what it sounded like.
You're under the supposition that record labels have integrity.
Well, no, I'm under the supposition that there's a guy that's listening to it and says, well, fuck, this is not Black Sabbath. We can't put this out. This is not what fans are expecting. It's not about integrity. It's about fucking record sales, and that's what they should be about, right?
Well, that's what they were trying to do by using the Black Sabbath name. They were hoping that people like if you threw Metallica, if it just said Metallica, right, and it was just Kirk, and people, there's still a lot of people that are not diehard fans that would not know. They would go like, "Oh shit, a new Metallica album," and then they listen to it. They'd be like, "This sounds weird."
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I don't know. It's just so. I mean, it's proven. It's been proven,
especially then. Now it might be harder in the internet.
Oh, nowadays,
but think about it. This was what 19.
This is
86.
Oh, it's
my guess
86. Yeah, January 86.
I nailed it.
No, it's just, to me, record companies are supposed to look out for themselves. They're only about the dollar. And yeah, you're using the Black Sabbath name. There's only one original member of Black Sabbath left. Yeah, great. Use the name all you want. Put out a greatest hits. Do something else. Put out a live album.
But keep in mind, this was also Warner Brothers. Everything up to that point, I believe, was on Vertigo. So Warner Brothers going, oh shit, let's release a Black Sabbath album.
Well, Vertigo was in Europe, and Warner Brothers was the United States. So they work with each other. Sometimes they don't. It was just messed up.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay. Seventh Star was mine. So then my next one, number 12 for me, is going to be Technical Ecstasy. And we kind of already discussed it. It was just one of these things. It was a throwback kind of album. They were trying to reinvigorate their career. Yes, they had not gone anywhere. They had released Sabotage the year before, but obviously there was all sorts of outside influences that were destroying the band from the inside. And Technical Ecstasy is just a mindless, to me, exercise in trying to be Black Sabbath. They had a core part of it. The sound was there, but some of the riffs were there. But I think overall, the songwriting itself was a little disjointed, and it didn't work. That's my thing. I mean, if I wanted to listen to the Beatles, and I would pick up a Beatles album, I don't have to hear Bill Ward, who's never sang a song for Black Sabbath before, all of a sudden decide he wants to sing, It's All Right. No, I don't need it. You know what? You do that on a side project. That's great. But this is Black Sabbath, baby. This is 1976. I don't need to hear something that sounds like it came out in 1966. Although much better than Never Say Die, because Never Say Die was just even worse. So, but you disagreed. You had it much lower, but that's my opinion on it. What do you have?
I mean,
Go on. Sorry.
so part of what was, problematic about Technical Ecstasy is the band was kind of exhausted following, like, they had a bunch of legal battles, with Sabotage. There was a bunch of stuff going on. I guess we could get into a little more detail when Sabotage comes around, but they were not in a good state of mind, and they were having already issues with Ozzy Osbourne. So the band was putting out an album when they were not a united front, when they were having issues with each other. And that's never a good state to be in unless you're Fleetwood Mac. So, it didn't necessarily work. And there's a reason why the album is what it is.
Exactly. So what is your number 12?
My number 12 is Headless Cross. I do really like this album. I think it's got some great songs on it, like Headless Cross and Devil and the Daughter, Kill in the Spirit World. I think there's a couple other Tony Martin albums that I like better, but this is one that I think was a kind of a good starting point for that that era of the band. Obviously, technically the starting point is Eternal Idol, but so those songs weren't written for Tony Martin. Those songs, as we know, were written for Ray Gillan. And there is a edition of the album that's come out since that has the demos with Ray Gillan. So
they sound so much better.
Okay.
No,
you like it better than the Tony Martin?
I listened to the Ray Gillan version, and there's a charisma that his voice has that it takes those songs to a different level. It's not a great album overall, but we're going back and talking about an album that we already mentioned, but it's not a great
album. Well, I'm going to get to more of it later. Right. So
it's not a great album overall, but Ray Gillan's version of the album to me is much better. But unfortunately, they had their issues with Ray, But man, just the way he sang them. I mean, Tony couldn't touch Ray Gillan with a 10-foot pole when it came to style of vocals and being a singer. Ray's an amazing singer.
So I'm going to keep my opinion on that for now. But I will say, well, let's just say that demo is definitely worth listening to. If you're going to pick up any version of the album, make sure to pick up the deluxe version that has 2 discs and has both versions of that album. But back to Headless Cross. Again, this is kind of a starting point for this era of the band in a way, because this is the first one that Tony Martin wrote, the lyrics for. So I think he reworked some of the lyrics on Eternal Idol. But I think Headless Cross is really good. So, but the next one I'm going to mention, I think, is just a little better, and maybe it's just my personal opinion on there. But my number 11 is Cross Purposes. So I think you had this at 18. But I really like the song Eyewitness. Like that one really caught my attention right off the bat. I think some of the lyrics are a little cheesy, but also what's not cheesy about the 80s and metal and early 90s and metal, I'm fine with that. Cross of Thorns is a pretty heavy song. I really like that one. Back to Eden, I like a lot. Hand That Rocks the Cradle. So there's just a couple more songs that I think are a little bit stronger than Headless Cross, and I tend to like it more. I think that's probably not going to be the overwhelming opinion, but I think Cross Purposes just had a little bit more of an effect on me.
I could totally understand that. I mean, it's just, to me, there are some good riffs on it. Again, same thing. It's just really good riffs, but the songs weren't that good. It's like you can have a million riffs, as proven by Metallica doing certain songs, but if they don't go well together and they don't play well with the lyrics and you don't construct the song properly, you don't go anywhere with the song. So
I think in the latter half of the album, that's definitely the case. I think it's stronger in the first half, but I've also been listening to this album since it came out. So.
right, there's certain things. I mean, you grow up with certain things that at the time you're like, oh, this is pretty cool, because, and I'm not trying to say this is your case, and like for me, all I knew from 1977 to 1980 was Kiss. That's it. But yeah, so people would sit, like they would see me sitting on the front of my house in the porch and listening to music, and I'm listening to my own Kiss tapes, and they were like, "Hey man, you got any Priest?" No. And they didn't ask for me because Maiden didn't exist at the time. So I'm trying to think who else. Some people would ask for Sabbath. And I'm like,
you got the Star Wars sound.
That's not that heavy. So all I knew was Kiss until things changed in 1980. But the same thing for you. You were into, you had basically dove into the Black Sabbath, so you were going to like just about anything that Sabbath put out. So as you
not forbidden.
you still had a few years to go on this one. Actually, no, it was 1 year. The next year. But my point being is when you listen to these albums over and over again, you never forget them. No matter how, you heard them when you were young, you will never forget the album, and it will always have a place in your heart. So that's just the kind of the impact that has at that age. And so it won't ever change. Like, that will always rank high for you because at the time period at which you absorbed it.
Yeah, to some degree, that's going to be true. I still think the riffs are pretty good. So, yeah, to each their own again.
Right. All right. So for me, number 11 is 13. Yeah, don't ask me how that works. Okay. 11 is 13. I had to put it, I felt that I had to put it where I put it because I felt no matter what, the fact that it was an Ozzy album still was better than some of the other albums like that came out, before it. I like Live Forever. God Is Dead is an okay song. What I noticed, I actually listened to it again today when I was at work. What I did notice about the album is, like you said earlier, the doom and gloom. It starts off with, is this the end or is this the beginning or the beginning of the end? It's, dude, we all know this is the last thing you guys are going to put out. So why did you have to sit there and say, this is probably going to be the last thing we put out? That's their version of that question. It doesn't make any sense. It was very, you were right. Ozzy sounds tired. He's just kind of like going through the motions. They've come out and said they did not like how Rick Rubin was handling the production, and not just because Rick Rubin sits there and lays down on the couch all the time. It's just what he was trying to get them to do was not who they were or who they are. That's who they were in 1970. It's not who they are at the time in that album came out in 2013. So that 10 years ago already. Wow. So they had, Tony, Ozzy, Geezer had all moved way past where they used to be. So they didn't really enjoy the process of making that album. And it shows. It shows up in the performance. All I can say, the performance, Brad Wilk had a badass drumming performance. I'll tell you that.
That's about it. And he's not even a member of the band.
Exactly.
So.
All right. So we're getting into the top 10 now. So 10 for me, Dehumanizer. That is the return of Ronnie James Dio. This is his second stint with the band. Album came out in 1992. big hit on that one was the song Time Machine that was part of the Wayne's World soundtrack. There's 2 different versions. The US version of this album actually includes both versions. So the Wayne's World version is a bonus track. I like TV Crimes. I like Computer God. There's that heaviness that Dio brought to it, but at the same time, there was a little bit of that speed that he brought with songs like TV Crimes and Time Machine.
So this is also my number 10.
All right.
So it's our third crossover. Yeah, this is a super heavy album. There's a lot to like about it. There's a lot of things I think people don't like about it. But for me, I remember when this came out, very happy that Dio being in the band. You know what? I would have heard, obviously, for me, I would have heard the Wayne's World soundtrack first because I owned it first. So the Time Machine version on there, I like a lot better. I guess I'm glad it's available on the US release, being a bonus track, because I think it's a superior cut of it. However, the version that's on the main album fits more in line with the production of the main album. TV Crimes, like you said, awesome song. Master of Insanity, that's a super heavy song, really cool. After All the Dead, that one's great. Computer God's a great opener. Yeah, I like it a lot, and it's a reunion of the Mob Rules era, which I think a lot of people really love. So I think this was a tough one because I guess I thought it was going to end up a little higher because of the impact it had on me and it being a Dio album, but it sits at number 10.
It sits at number 10 is right. And it's not that it's a bad album. There are other good albums that are better than this one.
Superior albums, yeah.
All right, so what do you have for number 9?
My number 9 is going to piss off some people, and I'm okay with that. My number 9 is Mob Rules. I always thought it would end up higher than it did, but I really thought about this, and I put a lot of work into choosing this list. Turn Up the Night, amazing song. Love it. Great opener. The Mob Rules, one of the best Sabbath songs there ever was, in my opinion. But for me, those are the 2 songs on the album that I really like. I think Voodoo is really good. It's a fun song. Sign of the Southern Cross, it's one that I think is a quality song, but there's something about it that's always just a little too slow for me, and I end up like kind of getting bored with it. But like Country Girl. What else is on the album?
Slipping Away is a good song.
It's all right. It's Over and Over is boring. Falling Off the Edge of the World is kind of boring to me. E5150 is not bad, but it's a short instrumental, kind of before, Mob Rules. But it's like, for me, it's that first half of the album, and then the second half of the album is like, I've listened to it far less. And it's not because I haven't given it a chance. I always do. But I trail off. And on the merit of the song Mob Rules, like, I feel like it should be higher, but there's better stuff above it to me.
And that's the funny thing, you sit there and say, oh, it should be higher, and you start thinking about it and like, it can't be, because there's this album, there's all these other albums that are ahead of it, and that's kind of like the bottom 10. Quite honestly, between you and I, they could have put them in any order, and they would still be correct. It's when you get to the top 10, you start saying, "Well, is this one better than this one? Is this one better than that one? This one has this many songs. This one's got this good riff in it. And it's a little bit more selective." So it's definitely. I don't think it's controversial, because when you start thinking about the other albums that we still have to name, that it kind of makes sense. For me, my number 9 was your number 13, Born Again. When I think about Born Again and the fact that, yeah, I like the song Trashed. I like the song Digital Bitch. Zero to Hero is pretty cool. You got 3 songs for me that were pretty decent songs. I mean, I really like Trashed. That was the first song I heard when this album came out. Digital Bitch, I was like, oh, this is a super cool song. And they say the word bitch in it, and Zero to Hero. Disturbing the Priest is disturbing. It's just this slow, plotty song. And to me, I what I don't like about the album though is it's these 2 instrumentals in the first 5 songs. It's like, really, like if you think about it, the overall length of the album is not very long, and then you're going to throw basically 2.5 minutes worth of instrumentals to break up side 1.
Well, The Dark is immediately leading into Zero the Hero. It's basically part of Zero the Hero, but it did what you like, where it separates them into 2 different tracks.
Yeah,
so you have to at least give it that.
I give it that. That's great. But for a song that's 7 minutes long, the extra 40 seconds don't give a shit. They could have just added.
Look, leave The Dark on the first half of the album, throw Stonehenge towards the end of the second half.
Right.
And it would probably worked better. But putting it as the second track following Trashed, kind of weird.
Yeah, I think if they had put, I guess they put Digital Bitch so that they can open up side 2, but in reality, you're talking about it was going to be hard to put in based on the song lengths and what they were trying, what records tried to do. They tried to split the times, evenly. It is what it is. I think
we're just lucky this album even exists because the circumstances are pretty crazy. Like, they got drunk, they're like, yeah, let's do an album together.
Yeah, I know. And then Ian's manager's like, hey, the next time you join a band, can you kind of give me a heads up?
The next day they were full of regret.
Oh, so, yeah.
It is what it is.
All right. So number 8 for me is your number 9, Mob Rules. There's no place else to put it. It's got to be in that spot because of the other stuff ahead of it. I agree with you to a degree about the songs on Mob Rules. I did like Slipping Away a little bit more than you did. I love Mob Rules. I love Turn Up the Night. Sign of the Southern Cross. I've grown to like that song. The problem with that song is it's too long. It is it just drones on, and the intro is really long. It's like Iron Maiden-esque. You got 11 minutes, and 5 minutes is really where the meat of the song is at. So that's where I put it. That's why I put it in that spot, because there's 7 other albums that to me are better. So, but it is a very good Ronnie James Dio Black Sabbath album.
Yeah, it's, for me, something about it reminds me of my feelings about Long Live Rock and Roll as well. Long Live Rock and Roll being the 3rd album from Rainbow. There's a couple songs on there I really like, and then I think about it, like the rest of the album I kind of don't feel as strong about. Whereas with Heaven and Hell and say Rising, comparatively, I think they're amazing albums. So there's something about it. Like Dio always follows up an amazing album with something that's kind of lackluster. For some reason, it's not always the case, and his solo career was a bit better. But yeah,
I wouldn't call this a lackluster album. Like if they would have come up with Dehumanizer after Heaven and Hell, I can see that. But this is pretty good.
Yeah, it's...
And Mob Rules is such a good song.
It is, I know, and just on the merit of, like I said, on the merit of that song alone, I feel like it should be higher. And I feel like I'm being blasphemous, but at the same time, think about the albums that we're about to talk about.
Exactly. All right, so what's your number 8 song?
My number 8 album.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Number 8 album
is Volume 4. It's still an amazing album. Changes is a great song. Supernaut, Snowblind, I love them, but there's something about Volume 4 that I think is a little bit weaker than some of the other albums. And for me, it's like there's FX instrumental, there's the Laguna Sunrise instrumental. They're good. Saint Vitus Dance is not bad, but there's a lot of like, again, this is kind of where they're starting to get a little bit experimental hippie stuff again, right? Like it's not like it just popped up on Never Say Die. Like they never got rid of it. There's always that kind of stuff. One of their most famous songs, which we will get to at in the relatively near future, A Planet Caravan, is very hippie. So it's not like it ever went away. It's just this has a little bit more of it than I like on some of the other albums, I would say.
So your number 8, Volume 4. My number 7 is Volume 4. And I'm jumping the gun here because we're talking about Volume 4.
It's about the same album,
right? So what I like about this album is this album to me is almost like it's under the radar as far as really good Black Sabbath songs, while at the same time it's very popular because they're good Black Sabbath songs in there.
They're great songs,
right?
Yeah.
Wheels of Confusion, Tomorrow's Dream, Changes, Supernaut. Side 1 is really, really good, right? But it's not their like top 10 songs. That's the funny thing. It's really good side 1, and then add Snowblind on the backside, side 2, song 6. It's really, really good. So, but for some reason, other albums are more famous, more popular, better songs in some cases, but it's so hard to beat that group of songs together. Like it's really good group of songs. And yes, I agree with you. Yeah, the whole thing about their old school style of writing, the 60s stuff never went away. But it's different with this because Black Sabbath, like for instance, they go from Wheels of Confusion, Tomorrow's Dream, they go to Changes. That's something that's happened on every Ozzy album. That kind of, I don't want to call it a conflict, that kind of contrast, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
The variety.
Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Okay. They established that pattern. So it's fine to stay with that pattern. But you can't sit there and say, Changes or even Planet Caravan are as flower power as the Beatles song that fucking Bill Ward sang. Okay. It's like, that's a completely different song. These songs, you kind of almost expect it because now you're 4 albums into Black Sabbath and you're like, this is the kind of thing that they do. So you're like, okay, I get it. This is Black Sabbath. When they did it on Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die, it was not the same vibe at all. So that's why I put this one at number 7 for me. So what's your number 7 song album?
My number 7 is gonna get me tarred and feathered. So my number 7 is Eternal Idol. I know there's a big fan base for this album. It was one that it took me a while to really get into, being, the first Tony Martin album. And it was so jarring to me. Like his voice really took a long time for me to appreciate. But I really like a lot of the songs on here. The Shining, Hard Life to Love, Glory Ride, Born to Lose, Lost Forever. And then I even appreciated the album even more once I finally heard the Ray Gillan version of it. It was available as a bootleg for a long time, and then officially released later on with better quality. And what I like about it is there's a lot of passion in the writing, and I think Tony was inspired when he wrote a lot of the riffs on here. There's some amazing guitar work, and I think the band feels very cohesive. And unfortunately, Ray was having some trouble with learning the lyrics of the song. It just wasn't meshing, and you can tell that the songs were written for him, like his style. And so it's unfortunate that there's this kind of disconnect there in some element. But I think Tony came in and he did a really good job, like Tony Martin, that is. And for me, this is an album that I end up listening to some of the songs on a semi-regular basis. I feel like it's got some bluesy elements that, like, say, Ray Gillan would later do with Badlands. And so I think there is some cool stuff there that is probably a bit overlooked. And I like this album, so I had to put it up a bit higher. And I know a lot of people aren't going to agree with me, but you gotta be honest about what you appreciate. Like, if you are a fan of something, don't ever be afraid to say it.
Just remember, when you walk in after I get to work tomorrow, you might want to watch out. I mean, look, you like what you like, and no one's gonna. Well, maybe I will. No one's gonna stop you from liking it like that. But you're wrong. It's just bottom line is,
Hey, you put 13 at number 11, so
13 was still an eternal idol. I mean, I get it. Every
hard disagree.
Well, if Eternal Idol would have come out with Ray Gillan's on vocals, it's a different album. I mean, you may disagree with me, but to me, like I mentioned it to you before, Tony Martin.
Well, I think Ray did a better job. It's just it wasn't working.
No, of course,
and that's just the reality of the situation. So I'm glad that there's that alternate version. And like I said, I started to appreciate the album more because I heard the version with Ray Gillan on vocals.
I mean, Ray Gillan's version to me is better. He has a style on his voice. There's just like I said, a charisma that just oozes from his voice that, some of those same lyrics or some of the same choruses just sound better coming out of his mouth. I mentioned to you prior to recording today that Tony Martin has this Dio-esque sound quality to his voice. Not the same, but there's a roughness that is more similar to Dio than not. And Ray Gillan, for his voice and his pitch, is a little closer, and there's no comparison. A little closer in pitch to Ozzy. And I think that's where there was some comfortability for Tony, and in terms of music. And then obviously it was Bob Daisley and Jeff Nichols who wrote the lyrics for Ray Gillan. So and Bob Daisley being someone who's worked with Ozzy, so it's there's that connection there. And like I said, not to say that Ray Gillan is anything close to Ozzy in terms of vocalist, because quite honestly, I think Ray's a better singer than Ozzy. Ozzy is really
now who's getting tarred.
No, because there's a difference. Ozzy's Ozzy. He has his very, very unique style that is extremely hard to duplicate and come across as genuine. Where as a legit singer, I think Ray's a better singer. There's a difference. I don't know how to really put it in any other way than that. So, so we did 7. We did Eternal Idol, Volume 4. Okay, so number 6. So we'll go back to me again. My number 6 is Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. We're getting to that point where we're getting to that narrow scope of albums of influence from this band, and Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, the song. Amazing song. Okay. Sabracadabra, very interesting song. Say it that way. I've grown to like Killing Yourself to Live a lot more in recent years, especially after hearing Chris Cornell sing it. Really, really cool version that he does. Fluff I could have dealt without, quite honestly.
It's just a transition,
it's
and Black Sabbath is
it's fluff. Exactly, and that goes along with the Planet Caravans and the changes. They've established that, so that's okay. you know. Um, and I put this down to the point where it's at number 6 because the other classic albums to me are better than this one.
I gotcha. So my number 6 is Sabotage. Sabotage has some awesome stuff. Hole in the Sky, Symptom of the Universe. That riff on Symptom of the Universe alone puts this as a top 10 album. The Writ, Am I Going Insane? Or a lot of people just know it as Am I Going Insane? I think that was the name of the radio edit. That is such a cool song. But some of the other stuff in between I don't like as much. I still like the whole album. To me, this is a back to front album. I'm so like I feel strongly that the first 6 Black Sabbath albums are all back to front. But they're front to back. I don't want to sing back to front. You listen to it backwards for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get the backwards messages. So let me say that again. Don't delete this, but they're front to back albums. But regardless, I really do feel that way about the first 6 albums. But there's some that I feel like have more songs that I will consistently just go out of my way to listen to. Now, there are many times where I'll just put on all 6 albums back to back to back, and they're not very long, so it's not hard to get through. But this Sabotage is amazing. It's just of the first 6, I guess it's my 5th favorite. Yeah.
No,
my number.
No, it's your 6th favorite.
No, because volume 4 is my 6th favorite of the original.
Oh, that's right. Because there's an album in there that's not the 6th original. I get it.
Yeah. So then, my number 5 is Master of Reality. Sweet Leaf is just an iconic track. After Forever is so good. Into the Void. This album has my favorite Black Sabbath song, period, which is Children of the Grave. Embryo and Orchid, I actually really like those transitions, instrumentals. But again, that just speaks to the merit of the albums that we're going to talk about next. I love this album, so it's hard for me to say it's number 5.
So okay. So my number 5 is Sabotage. Okay. So you just mentioned Sabotage, and obviously I have yet to mention Master of Reality, so it's a little bit higher on my list. Okay. And looking at the scope of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath for me, is Sabotage better? In my opinion, it is, because of the songs that it has, because of Hole in the Sky, because of Symptom of the Universe, because even though it's kind of there's a goofiness to it, but Am I Going Insane is a good song, right?
Yeah.
So there's that group of songs, and I'm like, okay, so is that group of songs better than the songs on Sabbath Bloody Sabbath? To me, there's the strength of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath and Sabracadabra, but I felt that the group of songs that was on Sabotage were just a little bit better than Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. That's why I came up with that being my number 5 album. So you said Master of Reality. I say Sabotage. All right. Now I'm going to go to my number 4. And here, there are going to be some people, like you said, that are going to get all bent out of shape. How could that possibly be? How could Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, put Black Sabbath at number 4? It's real easy. There's 3 better albums than Black Sabbath's first album. Just put it that way. Okay. Influential? Absolutely. Okay. Really good. Black Sabbath, the album has my favorite Black Sabbath song on it. Okay. It has The Wizard. Okay. It has NIB. It has the European version has Evil Woman on it, which was a cover song. But the rest of the album, and I'm including Black Sabbath, don't do it for me. So that's why, compared to the other 3 that I have ahead of it, that's why I have Black Sabbath at number 4.
Well, this is our 4th crossover. So I agree with you. I think Black Sabbath is number 4. I do like the title track. I know you don't. The Wizard is a great track. Um, NIV, or basically, which leads into NIV. That's an awesome bass solo. And then it goes into NIV, which is just amazing riff. One of those iconic tracks. I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, what am I listening to? This is so dark. This is crazy, you know? And I just loved it. Wicked World is another good one on there. And I guess a lot of people would probably know it as a bonus track, unless you're in Europe, where Evil Woman, Don't You Play Your Games With Me. It's a cover, but it's on there, and it's a great song. So I'm a big fan of this album, but I do like 3 other albums more.
Aha!
So my number 3, I think you had as number 6, and that was Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. Now this is the first Ozzy album that I owned, and I really love this album. Again, this is a front to back album for me. Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, National Acrobat, Sabracadabra, Killing Yourself to Live, and Spiral Architect. I absolutely love everything in between. It's good and it fits on the album. Even Fluff, I do like as kind of a transition piece. And to me, like, the merit of the songs put it a little bit above others. And I like the kind of experimentation they did. Like there is some very different stuff, some kind of jazzy and bluesy stuff on here that they didn't do on other albums too. So that kind of sets it apart for me. So it's a little bit of a step above, but again, it's to some degree negligible. I mean, all these albums are amazing at this point.
So for my number 3, I had already said Black Sabbath was 6. Well, my number 3 is Master of Reality. For the very same reasons that you said it was number 5 for you. It's got really good songs. To me, that the group of songs to me is better than some of the other ones that we mentioned previously. Sweet Leaf, awesome song. After Forever, I had never heard that song until I heard Biohazard do their version on the Nativity in Black cover albums that they did for Sony Music. And then I listened to the Black Sabbath version, and it's virtually identical until Biohazard starts rapping. It's so, I mean, like, I almost think musically and sonically, they're virtually identical. I could be absolutely wrong because I've never heard them back to back, but when I listen to one song over the other, it's always a long period of time in between. It sounds very reminiscent to each other. So I love the Black Sabbath version now a lot more than I used to, or not that I used to. I'd never heard it before, up until the mid 90s. Children of the Grave, excellent song. Lord of this World, Into the Void. I mean, to me, it's, you got 8 songs and we're looking at 6 or 5 that are pretty solid, and the other ones are nothing to sneeze at either. Even the instrumentals are interesting. So that was my number 3. All right. So
what's your number 2?
My number 2 is Heaven and Hell. The first Ronnie James Dio album. For me, this album is a front to back, just like you said, for some of the other albums. Side A, and we say side A because of cassettes, because of vinyl and stuff like that. Side A is hard to compete against those first 4 songs: Neon Nights, Children of the Sea, Lady Evil, Heaven and Hell. Then you flip it over and you got Wishing Well and Die Young. It just continues. This is a really, really, really good album. I'm not big on Walk Away, but Lonely Is the Word is a pretty cool song. So still, if I'm going to listen to this album, I'm not skipping Walk Away. So these 8 songs are outstanding. So this is my number 2 album.
It's also my number 2. Neon Nights, amazing opener. Children of the Sea, iconic. That's the first one that Black Sabbath wrote with Ronnie James Dio. Lady Evil, I think, is great. Heaven and Hell, just absolutely iconic song. Wishing Well was one of those that it really just kind of captivated me for a while. Like the guitar work on there alone is just amazing. Die Young is one of those songs that it just comes into my head every once in a while and just stays there. Like I will just find myself humming it every once in a while. Walk Away, I think, is probably the weakest song on the album. Lonely Is the Word is it's not bad. So for the most part, yes, this is a front to back album. But like track 6, Die Young, it could have ended on and been like perfect, but regardless, I love this album, and it is by far one of my favorite Ronnie James Dio albums. Like even, anything he did otherwise, this is up there for me, possibly my favorite album he ever did.
Well, that leaves us with number 1, and obviously it's a consensus. We've matched up again with Paranoid.
With Paranoid, yes.
For me, Paranoid, there's no question. This is, and we talked about it in the last episode. This is a career-defining album for Black Sabbath. They changed considerably, but yet stayed the same kind of thing. It's just that weird thing. They established their heaviness on this album. They had it with the Wizard, obviously the doomy Black Sabbath, NIB, but War Pigs opens this album and it doesn't relent from that point. Paranoid. Yes, it slows down with Planet Caravan, but damn, it picks up again with Iron Man, and even Iron Man, as slow as it is, speeds up at the end. Then Electric Funeral, Hand of Doom. I mean, shit, Rat Salad's an instrumental. That's probably the weakest song on the album.
But it's still really good.
Yeah, exactly. And then Fairies Wear Boots. Come on. This album's, for Black Sabbath, is virtually perfect.
Rat Salad is one of those, like, when I think about metal instrumentals, I don't think about it because I don't think of it as a metal instrumental. It's a rock, jazzy song, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's so good. It is really good. And like every song on here from beginning to end is a banger, like period. All 8 tracks. And there's some that have become so just and I hate to use the word again, but iconic, like Iron Man. I mean, who does not know Iron Man? Paranoid, that riff, the whole song is basically one riff, but it's such a good one. It doesn't matter. War Pigs, just absolutely amazing song. I think that's a generational song. It will never get old.
War Pigs has crossed over to the pop lexicon. Mm-hmm. The average person now knows War Pigs, probably more so than Paranoid. Not more so than Iron Man, because Iron Man just kind of that broke into the pop lexicon a long time ago. But War Pigs, mm-hmm, more recently, it's crossed over, and so many people know it. And then there was I can't remember who it was. I saw the other day, some rap artist did a version of this of War Pigs, killer version. And I'm like, wow, this is really good. He didn't rap it. He actually, because the lyrics lend itself to that. It was perfect for him. So,
I mean, Tesla's done cover. Obviously, Zakk Wylde's done his cover. Faith No More. Cake did a cover. Sacred Reich. T-Pain did one. Like, if you like.
Oh, I think that's
rap.
I think that's I think that's the one that was T-Pain. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many covers of it because it is such amazing, like just an amazing song. I mean, even the stuff that, like, think about Electric Funeral and the influence that would have on, Kirk Hammett with his wah wah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kidding, but but no, just. The techniques that were established here were the archetype of what really would become metal. Like, I think Black Sabbath is where everything started, obviously, but it was still at that point, they were still a 60s band to some degree. And then this hits, and it's just the evolution that I think metal bands would go, this is something I want to do. Or not bands, but musicians, I would say. And so many people cite this as a major influence on them. And it's totally understandable. Like, there's a lot of stuff on Heaven and Hell I like better than this album. But I can't say that there is a more perfect Black Sabbath album than Paranoid.
Yeah, absolutely correct. I mean, that's what I said before. You reemphasized everything. Is exactly right. What you're saying there. It's hard to really say anything else is better than this, because I mean, maybe a greatest hits. We sold our souls to rock and roll. Their greatest hits album in the 70s is probably better. Because it's a greatest hits album. But as a brand new album, it's way hard to compete with this one. And to think it only came out, for the most part, a few months later. I mean, it came out in September of 1970, and the first album came out in February. Think about 7 months. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's quicker. That's a quicker turnaround than Kiss was knocking out in those first 4 years. But
oh yeah, the pace at which they were releasing albums. I mean, we talk about this all the time with bands at that time period, but the pace at which they were putting out these absolute classics. I mean, 6 albums in a row is incredible. And all of them are classics. They really are.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, every album's going to go through a lull where, even the classic ones have something that people don't like, or even the band might not like, but they're classics for a reason, because for the most part, beginning to end, they're going to entertain the fan of that band for that period of time. So they are classics. And you know what? Like I said, there was people, Technical Ecstasy didn't break the string. They kept going. It was just all of a sudden like, whoa, they were crashing, and you could see that they were slowly crashing into the wall, and that Technical Ecstasy was the kind of, the writing on the wall kind of thing is wait a second, we need to reevaluate. And there was a lot of reevaluating that went on, but
yeah.
All right. Well, that's our Black Sabbath worst to first from both myself and Chris. So now that brings us to another long title for a Big Four. This is the Big Four Black Sabbath Non Ozzy / Dio songs. I've made you go first last week, so I think, right?
You're gonna go first this time, regardless. I started the main list.
Okay.
I'm still deciding between 2 songs. So go ahead.
All right. Well, I got to say this, and because we were talking about it, this is the only reason. I know we don't typically do this, but I have to mention a 5th song. So this is my honorable mention, "In for the Kill" from Seventh Star. Seventh Star, like I've referenced several times, could have easily have been a Whitesnake or a Rainbow album, specifically Rainbow. It sounds a lot like Rainbow. And maybe that obviously was Tony's way of getting, music out of his system. And, someone turned it into a Black Sabbath album. So In for the Kill. All right. Number 4 for me, another song off of Seventh Star. It is The Danger Zone or Danger Zone. Listening to these songs this week, I had to find songs that were pretty good out of a really bleak group of songs. And so Danger Zone made the cut, and that's number 4 for me. Number 3, I did say that I like this album, Tear. So number 3 for me is Heaven in Black off of the Tear album. And I did say that I like this album. So we're back at Tear again. Valhalla's number 2 for me. It's just the lyrics are pretty cool. The song is pretty cool. The riff is pretty cool. I thought this was a pretty cool song. But I could have picked a song off of Born. I could have picked several songs off of Born Again because I thought they were pretty neat. But I was like, you know what? I really need to spread the love on this one. But for number one for me, I had to go to Born Again. Trashed the first song I heard from Ian Gillan and Black Sabbath. It to me still stands out as being the best song of the non Ozzy Dio era.
Okay, I mean that's a really good list. I agree. There's an element of choosing is kind of hard out of this crop of songs. It'd be more difficult, especially for you, because there's a lot of it you weren't as familiar with, right? So this was kind of hard for me too, in a different way, because I do know the songs a bit better. So my number 4 is Eyewitness. That was one of the first ones that I remember hearing from Tony Martin, and I really liked the riff on it. Like I said, the lyrics sometimes come off as maybe a little cheesy, but I'm totally fine with that. My number 2 is going to be Devil and Daughter, or Devil and the Daughter, from Headless Cross. I really like that song. It's very heavy. I think it's probably the best representative off that album. And it was really tough for me because I wanted to kind of throw Headless Cross on there because I really do like that song. But I had to edge it out because it just, I think this list is just maybe a little better. And I don't like the honorable mentions, but I do want to say that I really do like In for the Kill too. I think it's an awesome song. It just doesn't. It never felt like Black Sabbath for me, because
No,
it's
not at all.
not really,
It felt like Rainbow. Yeah. I mean, if you throw Ronnie James Dio singing on that song, that's a Rainbow song.
Possibly, yeah, or Jolene Turner,
Yeah.
So my number 2 is Cross of Thorns. That one's off of Cross Purposes as well. That to me is my favorite song off that album. It's very like the emotion behind it is very strong. I really like the lyrics. There is the main chorus that I really like on that song too. So I don't know if you gave it much of a listen, but definitely give it another listen. Give it a try. Maybe it'll grow on you a little bit. But my number, it sticks with you. That's all that matters, right? My number 1 is Zero the Hero. That was my favorite song off of Born Again, and it's just such a cool song. Something about the lyrics. What's it gonna be? What's it gonna be, brother? Like I don't know. I just think that's really cool. And that the kind of lead in from the dark. Like I said, that was I want to say the only song from that era that appeared on the greatest hits that I had, and that's what threw me off so heavily was that. Let me find that greatest hits. But like it threw me off because Ian's voice is not like Ozzy's, but there are things that he does that are kind of similar. And I knew like Ozzy had, by that point, no, I guess he hadn't really gotten back with Black Sabbath. When did he do the shows with where when Dio ended up quitting?
That was after Dehumanizer.
Yeah, so that would have been later,
Yeah,
right?
because Ozzy had done no more tours. That was the 92, 93 shows. And so he had Dio was back with Black Sabbath for 92 for Dehumanizer. And then Ozzy asked Tony to see if Black Sabbath would open up for Ozzy on the final shows. And he said, no. Oh, well, not Tony, but Ronnie James Dio said, hell no. No way in hell.
We're not subjugating ourselves to...
Yeah, so then Rob Halford stepped in.
Let's see. So the greatest hits that I had was called The Best of Black Sabbath. And Yeah, it only has Heaven and Hell and Turn Up the Night from Dio. That's it. Everything else is Ozzy. And then it has The Dark / Zero the Hero. And I don't even remember it mentioning anybody but Ozzy on there. It says like all songs are written by Tony, Geezer, Ozzy, and Bill Ward, except where noted. And then I don't remember seeing anything like in the liner notes, other than it probably did have like their names like somewhere on there. But like that's bull. Like only 3 songs out of 32 made it from any era other than Ozzy, and it's got a Hard Road on there. It's got a Hard Road rather than, I don't know, let's say Neon Nights or
Children of the Sea.
Children of the Sea, but like Mob Rules. Come on.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was not a good representation of Black Sabbath. So it was made by Sanctuary Records.
Oh, it was just one of those.
Yeah, it was one of those like, hey, we own some shit. Let's put it out. So
all right. I had all those songs at some point. I was like, okay, maybe I could pick this song, maybe I can pick that song. But you know, in all honesty, I was kind of like, I got to go with what makes my foot tap, which makes my head bob. So these other ones did it for me. So
I get it.
That's my big 4. All right.
You know, technically, we probably could have put either Bill Ward song on there too.
No, we couldn't. All right. That's our big 4 non Ozzy Dio Black Sabbath songs, and that brings an end to this wonderful episode of Debating Metal. Remember, you can listen to us every week on your favorite podcast platform, so click like or subscribe so you can just wake up to us waiting for you to click play.
Sounds a little creepy. And don't forget you can interact with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. If you listen to us on YouTube, be sure to leave us a comment and ring that bell to be notified when we post a new episode. And remember to tune in next week when we spark up another exciting metal debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe and always turn it up to 11.
See ya.